The morning shift at the Thornfield Hotel always started the same way for Margaret. She would arrive through the service entrance at exactly 5:30, change into her gray uniform, and begin her rounds before the guests woke up. For the past 12 years, this had been her routine. Every single day, she scrubbed the same marble floors, polished the same brass railings, and cleaned the same crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Margaret was 52 years old, but her hands looked older. Years of cleaning solutions and hard work had left them rough and worn. She didn't mind, though. This job paid the bills. It kept a roof over her head and food on her table. That was enough, or at least, that's what she told herself every morning when she tied her hair back and picked up her cleaning supplies. The Thornfield wasn't just any hotel. It was the kind of place where movie stars stayed when they came to town. Where business executives closed million-dollar deals over breakfast. Where weddings cost more than most people earned in a year. Margaret had seen it all from the corners of rooms, from behind service carts, from the places where people like her became invisible. And invisible was exactly what she had become. Guests would walk right past her without a glance. Sometimes they would talk about her as if she wasn't even there. She had learned to accept it. In their world, cleaning staff were part of the furniture, just another fixture in the background of their important lives. On this particular Tuesday evening, something different was happening. The entire crystal ballroom on the second floor had been transformed for a charity gala. Margaret had watched the preparations all day. Workers had brought in thousands of white roses. They had set up tables with silk tablecloths and chairs with velvet cushions. The chandeliers had been turned up to full brightness, making the whole room sparkle like the inside of a jewelry box. The hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, had asked her to stay late. They needed extra staff to keep everything running smoothly during the event. Margaret had agreed, even though it meant missing her usual Tuesday evening at the community center. She could use the overtime pay. Her rent had gone up again last month. By 7 o'clock, the guests started arriving. Margaret stood near the service door watching them file in. The women wore gowns that probably cost more than she earned in 6 months. Diamonds and pearls caught the light with every movement. The men looked sharp in their tuxedos, laughing loudly and slapping each other on the back like old friends reuniting after years apart. Margaret's job for the evening was simple. Stay out of sight, but keep the champagne table stocked. Remove empty glasses before they piled up. Make sure the dessert station never looked messy. Be helpful but invisible. She had done this kind of work 100 times before. As she moved quietly around the edges of the ballroom, refilling champagne flutes and wiping up small spills, she noticed the piano. It sat in the far corner, half hidden behind a decorative screen covered in climbing ivy. The old Steinway grand piano had been there for as long as she could remember. Its black surface was still shiny, but up close you could see the scratches and wear. The ivory keys had turned yellow in places like old photographs. Margaret knew that piano well. Too well, perhaps. She had run her fingers across those keys more times than she could count. Always when the ballroom was empty. Always when no one was watching. She knew which keys stuck slightly when you pressed them. She knew which strings were broken, creating dead notes that never rang out properly. She knew the exact feel of the bench, how it wobbled just a bit on the left side. Mr. Peterson had mentioned last week that the piano was going to be removed soon. It was too old, too damaged. They were going to replace it with a newer model for weddings and events. Margaret had felt a small pang of sadness when she heard that, though she didn't say anything. That piano had become something like a friend to her over the years. A silent companion during lonely late-night shifts. The gala continued, growing louder and more energetic as the evening went on. Margaret kept to her duties, moving like a shadow through the crowd. She caught fragments of conversations as she worked. Stock market talk, vacation homes, private schools for children, country clubs and yacht races. A world so far removed from her own that it might as well have been happening on another planet. Around 9:30, she was clearing glasses from a table near the piano when she noticed a group of young men gathering nearby. They were in their 30s, dressed in expensive suits that fit perfectly. Their faces were flushed from champagne, and they were laughing about something one of them had said. Margaret tried to move past them quietly, but one of them suddenly turned and looked directly at her. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. "You there?" Cleaning lady, Margaret froze, Several other guests turned to look. She felt her face grow warm. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, keeping her eyes down. The young man smiled, but there was something cruel in it. Something that made her stomach tighten with unease. His friends were watching now too, waiting to see what would happen. "We were just talking about this old piano here," he said, gesturing toward the Steinway. "It's practically an antique, isn't it? Probably doesn't even work anymore." Margaret didn't respond. She had learned long ago that sometimes the safest thing was to say nothing at all. "I bet you've never played a piano before, have you?" he continued, his smile growing wider. His friends were starting to chuckle now. "Someone like you probably doesn't even know what these things are for." The words stung, but Margaret kept her expression neutral. She had heard worse over the years. Much worse. She started to turn away, hoping the conversation would end there. Wait, the young man said, holding up his hand. "I've got an idea. This is a charity event, right? We're all here to be entertained while we donate money to good causes. So how about you entertain us? Go ahead and play that piano. Give us a little concert." More people were watching now. Margaret could feel dozens of eyes on her. The young man's friends were openly laughing. Someone else nearby said, "Oh, this should be good." Margaret's hands were shaking as she held the tray of empty glasses. Her heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct told her to just walk away, to disappear through the service door and hide in the kitchen until this moment passed. But she couldn't move. The crowd was growing larger, drawn by the spectacle. More guests were turning in their seats to see what was happening. The young man was still smiling, still waiting, enjoying every second of her discomfort. "Go on," he said, his voice dripping with false encouragement. "Don't be shy. I'm sure you're full of hidden talents. Aren't you?" The laughter grew louder. Margaret felt trapped like an animal surrounded by predators. She knew that walking away would only give them more to laugh about. They would talk about the scared cleaning lady who ran away. The story would spread through the room, another joke to share over champagne. Her eyes moved to the piano. That old broken yellowing Steinway that was scheduled to be thrown away next week. The piano that had been her only comfort during so many long, lonely nights. Slowly, Margaret set down her tray on a nearby table. Her hands were still trembling, but she forced herself to take a step forward, then another. The crowd parted slightly as she walked toward the piano, their laughter following her every step. She reached the bench and stood there for a moment, looking down at those familiar yellow keys. The young man said something else, but she didn't hear it. The laughter faded into background noise. Margaret sat down on the wobbly bench and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She closed her eyes and took one deep breath. Margaret kept her eyes closed for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Behind her eyelids, she could still sense the brightness of the chandeliers. She could hear the whispers and giggles spreading through the crowd. Someone said something about getting their phone ready to record this. Another voice said, "This is going to be hilarious." Her fingers rested on the keys, but she didn't press down yet. In that moment of silence, memories came flooding back. Memories she had locked away for so long that they felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. She was 7 years old again, standing in front of an old upright piano in her elementary school's music room. Mrs. Chen, the music teacher, was showing her where to place her fingers. "You have a gift," Mrs. Chen had whispered. "A real gift. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." She was 12, practicing for hours in the cramped apartment while her mother worked double shifts at the factory. The piano they had was barely functional, donated by a church. Half the keys stuck, but Margaret didn't care. She played until her fingers ached, until the neighbors banged on the walls telling her to stop. She was 17, sitting in front of 3 judges at the state music competition. She had played Chopin that day. The judges had stood up when she finished. One of them, an elderly man with tears in his eyes, had told her she was destined for greatness. "We'll be watching your career," he had said. "We'll be buying tickets to your concert someday." But that someday never came. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at the keys in front of her. Yellow and worn, just like her hands. Broken in places, just like her dreams had been. But still capable of making music. Still capable of something beautiful if given the chance. She pressed down on the first key. Middle C. The note rang out clear and pure, cutting through the chatter in the ballroom. The laughter didn't stop completely, but it quieted a bit. People were curious now, wondering what would happen next. Margaret's right hand moved to E, then G. A simple C major chord. Basic, elementary, the kind of thing a beginner would play. Behind her, she heard someone say, "See?" She probably knows one song, maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. More laughter. But Margaret barely heard it anymore. Her left hand joined her right, and suddenly, the simple chord transformed into something else. Her fingers began to move faster, finding the patterns they had memorized so many years ago, patterns that her hands remembered even when her mind tried to forget. She started with something gentle. A nocturne by Chopin, one of the easier ones. Her fingers moved across the keys like water flowing over stones, smooth and natural. The broken strings created occasional dead notes, but Margaret knew this piano. She knew which keys to avoid, which ones to press lighter, which ones needed more weight. The laughter stopped completely now. Margaret could feel the change in the room even with her back to the crowd. The whispers died down. The clinking of champagne glasses ceased. Even the waiters stopped moving, but she wasn't finished. Not even close. The gentle nocturne was just a warm-up. Just a way to remind her fingers of what they could do. What they had always been able to do, hidden away for all these years. Without pausing, Margaret shifted into something different. Something harder. Her hands spread wider across the keyboard, reaching for notes at opposite ends. The music grew louder, more complex, faster. Her fingers moved in ways that seemed impossible, crossing over each other, stretching, dancing across the yellowed keys like they were born to be there. She was playing Rachmaninoff now. Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most difficult pieces ever written, the kind of music that professional pianists practiced for years to master, the kind of music that required not just skill but soul, heart, everything you had to give, and Margaret gave it everything. The broken piano sang under her fingers. Yes, some notes were dead. Yes, the tuning was off in places, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the emotion pouring out of every chord, every run, every crashing crescendo. This wasn't just playing. This was decades of pain and longing and loss, all transformed into something beautiful, something that made you forget to breathe. Margaret's eyes were closed again, but not from fear this time. She was somewhere else now. Somewhere far away from the crystal ballroom and the mocking guests and the gray uniform that marked her as invisible. She was on a concert stage in Vienna. She was recording in a studio in New York. She was receiving a standing ovation at Carnegie Hall. She was living all the lives she could have lived, all the dreams that had died before they could bloom, all condensed into these few minutes of music. Her whole body moved with the piece now. She swayed and leaned, putting her weight behind the dramatic chords. Sweat formed on her forehead. Her fingers flew so fast they were almost a blur. The music swelled and crashed like ocean waves, building to a climax that seemed to fill every corner of the massive ballroom. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The final chord rang out, hanging in the air like a question without an answer. Margaret's hands lifted from the keys and settled in her lap. She sat perfectly still, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. For a moment there was absolute silence. Complete and total silence. Margaret kept her eyes closed, afraid to turn around. Afraid to see their faces. Afraid that the laughter would start again worse than before. But the laughter didn't come. Instead, a single person began to clap. Slow, deliberate applause. Then another person joined in. Then another. And then suddenly the entire ballroom exploded with sound. Not laughter this time. Applause. Thunderous, overwhelming applause. Margaret finally opened her eyes and turned around. What she saw made her freeze. Every single person in the ballroom was standing. Every single one. Their hands were raised high, clapping so hard it must have hurt. Some people had tears streaming down their faces. Others stood with their mouths open in shock. The young man who had mocked her, who had started this whole thing, stood pale and motionless, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. The applause went on and on. It didn't stop. People were shouting now. "Bravo," someone yelled. "Magnificent," called another voice. An elderly woman in a glittering silver gown was pushing through the crowd, making her way toward the piano. She was crying openly, mascara running down her cheeks. Margaret stood up from the bench on shaky legs. She didn't know what to do. She had never performed for anyone before. Not really. Not like this. All those years of playing alone in empty churches and locked ballrooms, she had imagined this moment 1,000 times. But she had never truly believed it would happen. The elderly woman in silver finally reached her. Without a word, she grabbed Margaret's rough, worn hands and held them tightly. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice barely audible over the continued applause. "Where did you train? Why have I never heard of you?" Margaret looked at this elegant stranger holding her hands and felt something crack open inside her chest. All the years of silence, all the years of pretending that her dreams didn't matter, all the years of being invisible. "I'm nobody," Margaret said quietly. "I'm just the cleaning lady." The woman's grip tightened. "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "You are not nobody. What you just did, that was not nobody. That was extraordinary. That was world class. That was—" She paused, searching for the right word. "That was magic." More people were crowding around now, all trying to talk to Margaret at once. Questions flew at her from every direction. Where had she studied? Who was her teacher? Why wasn't she performing professionally? How long had she been playing? Would she play something else? Margaret felt dizzy, overwhelmed. The room seemed to spin around her. Just 5 minutes ago, she had been invisible. Just 5 minutes ago, she had been nothing more than the woman who cleaned their floors and cleared their glasses. Now everyone wanted to know her name. The elderly woman in the silver gown wouldn't let go of Margaret's hands. She introduced herself as Elena Volkov, and the name meant nothing to Margaret at first. But the people around them seemed to know exactly who she was. They stepped back slightly, giving her space, showing her a kind of respect that went beyond simple politeness. "Please," Elena said, her accent thick with Eastern European roots. "You must tell me your story, all of it. From the beginning." Margaret looked around at the sea of faces staring at her. Rich people, important people, the kind of people who normally looked right through her. Now they were hanging on her every word, waiting to hear what she would say. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. "There's not much to tell," Margaret started, her voice quiet and uncertain. "I'm 52 years old. I work here at the hotel. I clean the rooms and the ballrooms and the lobbies. I've been doing it for 12 years now. But the piano," Elena pressed gently. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "That was Rachmaninoff. That was concert-level playing. Better than concert-level. That was playing with soul." Margaret felt her throat tighten. She hadn't talked about this part of her life in so long. She had buried it so deep that sometimes she almost forgot it had ever happened. Almost. "I started when I was 7, she said slowly. "My elementary school had a music program. Mrs. Chen, the music teacher, she noticed something in me. She said I had an ear for it. A natural talent. She started giving me extra lessons after school for free. The crowd had grown even larger now. People from other parts of the ballroom had heard about what happened and were pushing in to see the cleaning lady who could play like a virtuoso. But they were quiet. Everyone was listening. By the time I was 10, I was winning competitions. Local ones at first, then regional. I got into a special arts program at my middle school. The teachers there said I could go professional someday. That I could play in concert halls, maybe even record albums." Margaret's voice cracked slightly. "They made it sound so easy, like it was already decided." Elena nodded, her eyes understanding. She had heard stories like this before. She knew how they usually ended. "What happened?" someone in the crowd asked. Margaret took a deep breath. "My mother got sick when I was 16. She worked at a textile factory, and the chemicals there, they damaged her lungs. She couldn't work anymore. We didn't have insurance. No savings. My father had left years before. It was just the two of us." She paused, remembering those days. The hospital bills piling up on the kitchen table. Her mother's labored breathing at night. The impossible choice she had to make. "I got accepted to the Conservatory of Music on a full scholarship. It was my dream school. My teachers were so proud. They threw me a little party at school. Everyone said I was going places, that I'd make them all proud someday." "But you didn't go," Elena said softly. "It wasn't a question." "I couldn't," Margaret replied. "The scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses. Not books or supplies or transportation. And my mother needed medicine. She needed care. She needed someone to take care of her. So I got a job instead. At a grocery store at first, then cleaning offices at night. I told my teachers I was deferring for a year. Just 1 year, I said. Then I'd go. The ballroom was so quiet now you could hear the ice melting in abandoned drinks. But 1 year became 2, then 5, then 10. My mother lived for 8 more years. I was glad for every single one of them. I don't regret taking care of her. I don't. But by the time she passed, I was 24 years old. Too old to start over. Too far behind. All my former classmates had graduated, had careers, had moved on with their lives, and I was still cleaning offices. Margaret looked down at her hands, at the calluses and the rough skin. I kept playing, though. Whenever I could. I'd find empty churches and ask if I could use their pianos. Community centers. Sometimes late at night here at the hotel, when everyone was gone and the ballrooms were empty, I'd sit at this old broken Steinway and play for nobody. Just for myself. Just to remember what it felt like. A tear rolled down Elena's cheek. She wasn't the only one crying now. All around the ballroom, people were wiping their eyes. Even the young man who had mocked Margaret stood with his head bowed, his face flushed with shame. "That piece you played," Elena said. "The Rachmaninoff. When did you learn it?" "I was 17, Margaret answered. "It was going to be my audition piece for the conservatory. I practiced it every day for 6 months. I could play it in my sleep. Even now, all these years later, my fingers remember every note." Elena finally released Margaret's hands and pulled out her phone. "I recorded it," she said. "Your performance. I hope you don't mind. I record everything at these events. It's a habit." Margaret felt a flutter of panic. "You recorded me?" "Everyone should hear this," Elena said firmly. "Everyone should know what real talent sounds like. What real artistry is. Not the manufactured, auto-tuned nonsense that passes for music these days. But this, what you did here tonight, this is the real thing." Before Margaret could respond, Elena was already typing on her phone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "I have 2 million followers on social media," she explained. "Most of them are classical music lovers. Musicians, teachers, students, they need to see this." "Wait," Margaret said, suddenly afraid again. "I don't think that's a good idea. I'm nobody. I'm just—" "Stop saying that," Elena interrupted, her voice sharp but not unkind. "Stop saying you're nobody. You just played one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written on a broken instrument, and you made it sound like heaven. That is not nobody. That is somebody. That is somebody extraordinary." She pressed a button on her phone. "There, it's posted. With a caption explaining who you are and what happened here tonight." Margaret felt lightheaded. This was too much, too fast. 10 minutes ago she was invisible. Now a famous person was posting videos of her to millions of people. It didn't make sense. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Mr. Peterson, the hotel manager, appeared at the edge of the crowd. His face was pale. He looked between Margaret and the sea of guests like he couldn't quite process what was happening. "Margaret," he said uncertainly, I had no idea. In all these years, I never knew you could—" "Nobody ever asked," Margaret said simply. The truth of those words hung in the air. Nobody ever asked. For 12 years she had worked at this hotel, becoming part of the background, a fixture, invisible, and nobody had ever once asked her if she had dreams, if she had talents, if she was more than just the person who scrubbed their floors. Elena's phone began to buzz. Then it buzzed again, and again. She looked at the screen, her eyes widening. "It's already being shared," she said in disbelief. Hundreds of shares in just 2 minutes. No, wait. Thousands now. Margaret's own phone, an old cheap model that could barely handle text messages, started vibrating in her uniform pocket. She pulled it out and saw notifications popping up one after another. Friend requests, messages from numbers she didn't recognize, emails flooding her inbox. "What's happening?" she whispered. Elena looked up from her phone, a smile spreading across her face. "You're going viral, my dear. The whole world is about to discover what we just discovered here tonight." The young man who had challenged Margaret to play finally found his voice. He pushed through the crowd, his face red with embarrassment and shame. "I need to apologize," he said, his voice shaking. "What I did was cruel. I was making fun of you. I thought it would be funny. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. She could have said something cutting, something to make him feel even worse, but she was too tired for anger, too overwhelmed by everything else that was happening. "You gave me a gift tonight," she said quietly. "You didn't mean to, but you did. You made me play in front of people for the first time in my life. So thank you, I guess." The young man looked like he might cry. He nodded and backed away, disappearing into the crowd. Elena's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it and gasped. "Margaret, you have to see this. The video has 500,000 views already. And the comments, oh, you should read these comments. People are calling you a genius." A hidden master. They're saying this is the most moving performance they've ever heard. Margaret stared at the phone screen Elena held out to her. She saw her own image there, hunched over the broken piano, her gray uniform clearly visible. But the face she saw didn't look like the face she saw in the mirror every morning. This face looked alive, transported, lost in the music. In the video, you couldn't hear the mocking laughter that had started everything. You couldn't see the cruel smiles or feel the humiliation she had felt. All you could hear was the music. All you could see was a woman pouring her entire soul into a performance, and apparently, the entire world was listening. Margaret didn't sleep that night. How could she? By the time she got home to her small studio apartment at 2 a.m, the video had been viewed over 5 million times. 5 million. The number was so big it didn't feel real. She sat on her worn couch, still in her uniform, staring at her phone as the notifications kept coming. Messages from strangers all over the world. People in Japan saying they were crying. Someone in Brazil calling her an inspiration. A music teacher in Germany asking if she gave online lessons. But it was the other messages that made her hands shake. The ones that scared her. A concert hall in Chicago wanted to book her for a performance next month. A recording studio in Los Angeles asked if she was interested in making an album. 3 different music schools offered her teaching positions. A talent agent from New York left a voicemail saying he could make her a star. Margaret set the phone down and put her head in her hands. This was too much. Way too much. She was a cleaning lady. She had been a cleaning lady for 12 years. You didn't just stop being one thing and become something else overnight. That's not how life worked. Not for people like her. At 6 a.m, there was a knock on her door. Margaret jumped, her heart racing. Nobody ever knocked on her door. She looked through the peephole and saw Elena standing in the hallway holding 2 cups of coffee. "I hope I didn't wake you," Elena said when Margaret opened the door. "But I figured you weren't sleeping anyway." She was right. Margaret let her in, suddenly self-conscious about her tiny apartment. One room that served as bedroom and living room and kitchen all at once. A bathroom so small you could barely turn around in it. Furniture from thrift stores. Paint peeling in the corners. If Elena noticed any of this, she didn't show it. She handed Margaret one of the coffees and sat down on the couch like they were old friends. 10 million views now, she said. And it's been picked up by the major news networks. CNN called me this morning. So did the BBC. Everyone wants to know who you are. Margaret sipped the coffee. It was good coffee, expensive, the kind she never bought for herself. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "This is all happening so fast. Yesterday I was invisible. Today everyone wants something from me." "I know it's overwhelming," Elena said gently. "Believe me, I know. But Margaret, you need to understand something. What happened last night doesn't happen every day. That kind of raw talent combined with that kind of emotional depth, combined with that kind of backstory. People are moved by it. They're inspired by it. You've touched something in millions of people." "But I'm not ready," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "I haven't performed in front of people in 35 years. I don't have the right clothes for concerts. I don't have an agent or a manager or any of the things you need. I don't even own a piano." Elena was quiet for a moment, watching Margaret over the rim of her coffee cup. Then she said something that changed everything. "What if you didn't have to figure it all out alone? What if you had help?" Margaret looked up. "What do you mean?" "I used to be a concert pianist," Elena explained. "Did you know that? I performed all over the world for 20 years. Then I got arthritis in my hands and had to stop. It broke my heart. But I had money saved. Investments. I started a foundation to support classical musicians who showed exceptional talent but faced financial barriers. We've helped dozens of artists launch their careers." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Let me help you, Margaret. Let the foundation help you. We can handle the business side of things. Get you a proper agent, a lawyer to review contracts, a financial advisor. We can arrange performances at smaller venues first so you can build your confidence. We can get you a piano, a place to practice, whatever you need." Margaret felt tears welling up. "Why would you do all that for me?" "Because what you have is rare," Elena said simply, "and because the world needs to hear it. But more than that, because you deserve this chance. You earned it 35 years ago when you gave up your dreams to take care of your mother. You've been paying for that one selfless choice your entire life. It's time you got something back." The tears spilled over now, running down Margaret's cheeks. She had been strong for so long, strong through her mother's illness, Strong through decades of menial work. Strong through being invisible and overlooked and dismissed. But sitting here in her tiny apartment with this woman who barely knew her offering kindness, the walls finally crumbled. "I'm scared," Margaret whispered. "What if I'm not good enough? What if last night was just luck? What if I get up on a real stage and I freeze? What if everyone realizes I'm just a cleaning lady who happens to know how to play piano?" Elena reached over and took Margaret's hand. "Then you'll still be more than you were yesterday. But that's not going to happen. I've been in this business for 40 years. I know talent when I see it. You're not just good enough, Margaret. You're extraordinary." Over the next few days, Margaret's life turned completely upside down. She had to take a leave of absence from the hotel. Mr. Peterson granted it immediately, probably worried about bad publicity if he didn't. The story had made national news by then. "Hidden piano prodigy found working as hotel cleaner," the headlines read. "Cleaning lady's performance goes viral, moves millions to tears." Reporters showed up at her apartment building. The landlord wasn't happy about it, but what could he do? Margaret stopped answering her door. She only left the apartment to meet with Elena and the people from the foundation. They moved quickly. Within a week, they had found her a small but nice apartment in a better neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe with actual space to breathe. They brought in a beautiful upright piano, not too big but in perfect condition. When Margaret pressed the keys for the first time and heard the pure, clear notes ring out, she cried again. A talent agent named Robert took her case. He was older, experienced, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that put Margaret at ease. "We're not going to rush this," he told her. "We're going to be smart about it. Build your reputation slowly and steadily." But the world had other ideas. The video hit 20 million views, then 30 million. Media outlets around the world were covering the story. Late-night talk shows made jokes about how everyone had hidden talents. Musicians and celebrities started sharing the video, adding their own commentary about how moved they were. A famous pop singer with 50 million followers posted, "This woman made me cry. Real talent. Real heart. This is what music should be." Margaret got a call from the Conservatory of Music, the same school that had offered her a scholarship 35 years ago. The dean himself was on the line. "We made a mistake," he said. "We should have found a way to make it work back then. We want to make it right now. We'd like to offer you a position as artist in residence. You would perform occasionally, teach a few classes, and inspire our students." Margaret had to sit down. The conservatory, her dream school, the place she had imagined walking through every day when she was 17 years old. "I don't have a degree," she said weakly. "I never finished my education." "You have something more valuable than a degree," the dean replied. "You have lived experience. You have a story that our students need to hear. And you have talent that comes along once in a generation." Elena helped her negotiate the contract. A fair salary, benefits, time to practice and prepare. It was more money than Margaret had ever imagined earning. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to save. Enough to finally stop worrying about every single dollar. But it was the other offers that really shocked her. The symphony orchestra in Boston wanted her as a guest soloist. A prestigious music festival in Europe invited her to perform. Recording studios wanted to produce an album. Publishers wanted to write her biography. "One step at a time," Robert kept saying. "We don't want to burn you out. We don't want to overwhelm you." But Margaret was already overwhelmed. She spent hours every day at the new piano, practicing pieces she hadn't played in years. Her fingers remembered more than she expected. The muscle memory was still there, buried under decades of neglect but ready to wake up. Some days were harder than others. She would sit at the piano and freeze, paralyzed by fear. What if she had used up all her luck that one night at the hotel? What if she could never play that well again? Elena would call her on those days, somehow knowing when Margaret needed encouragement. "Talent doesn't disappear," she would say. "It was always there. You just needed someone to see it." 3 weeks after the viral video, Margaret gave her first official performance. Not at a major concert hall, but at a small venue that seated about 200 people. Elena thought it would be a good way to ease back into performing without too much pressure. But somehow the news got out. The tickets sold out in minutes. People offered hundreds of dollars for seats. The venue had to hire extra security to handle the crowd outside. Margaret stood backstage in a simple black dress that Elena had helped her pick out. Her hands were shaking. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. Through the curtain, she could hear the audience talking, waiting, expecting something amazing. "I can't do this," she whispered to Elena. "This is different from the hotel. Those people weren't expecting anything. These people paid money. They're expecting a miracle." Elena took both of Margaret's hands in hers. "They're expecting you to play piano. That's all. Just like you did that night. Just like you've done thousands of times alone in empty rooms. The only difference is that now people are listening." "That's a big difference," Margaret said, "is it?" Elena smiled. "You didn't play for them that night at the hotel. You played for yourself. You played because the music needed to come out. So do that again. Forget they're there. Just play." The stage manager gave the signal. It was time. Margaret took a deep breath and walked out onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was deafening. The lights were bright. Much brighter than Margaret had expected. She walked across the stage slowly, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The grand piano sat in the center waiting for her. A beautiful instrument, perfectly tuned, every key working exactly as it should. So different from that broken Steinway at the hotel. Margaret sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. She looked out at the audience for the first time. 200 faces staring back at her. She could see Elena in the front row, smiling encouragingly. Robert the agent was there too. And scattered throughout the crowd were people holding up phones, ready to record every moment. Her hands hovered over the keys. This was it, her first real performance. The beginning of whatever came next. But as she sat there, something unexpected happened. She thought about her mother, about those 8 years of taking care of her, of watching her slowly fade away. Her mother had never once complained. Never once made Margaret feel guilty for giving up the conservatory. "You have time," she would say. "You're young. Your time will come." Margaret had stopped believing that somewhere along the way, stopped believing that time would ever come. But here she was, 52 years old, gray hair starting to show at her temples, hands rough from years of hard work, and somehow, impossibly, her time had arrived. She took a breath and began to play. This time, she chose something different. Not Rachmaninoff, not Chopin, something she had written herself when she was 19, during those dark months after her mother first got sick. She had never played it for anyone, had never even written it down properly. It existed only in her memory and in her fingers. The melody started soft and sad, notes that spoke of loss and longing, of dreams deferred and sacrifices made. Her left hand created a gentle rhythm underneath while her right hand told the story of a girl who had to become a woman too fast, who had to choose between her own future and someone she loved. The audience was completely silent. No coughing, no shifting in seats, just absolute attention. Margaret's playing grew stronger, more confident. The sad melody transformed into something else, something that spoke of resilience, of waking up every day and choosing to keep going even when everything felt hopeless, of finding small moments of beauty in a hard life, of playing piano in empty rooms at midnight just to remember who you used to be. Her fingers moved faster now, the music building to something powerful. This wasn't sadness anymore. This was survival. This was strength. This was 35 years of refusing to completely let go of the dream, even when it seemed dead and buried. And then the music shifted one final time. It became lighter, hopeful. The melody soared upward, reaching for something bright and new, for second chances, for doors opening when you thought they were all locked forever, for strangers who saw something in you that you had stopped seeing in yourself. Margaret played the final notes and let them ring out into the silence. Then she lifted her hands and placed them in her lap. She closed her eyes, suddenly exhausted. Every emotion of the past 3 weeks had poured out through that piece. Joy and fear and grief and hope all mixed together. The applause started immediately, but it was different from the applause at the hotel. That had been surprise and shock. This was something deeper. People stood up slowly one by one until everyone was on their feet. Some were crying openly. Others just stood there looking stunned. Margaret opened her eyes and stood up. She didn't know what to do, so she just bowed slightly. The applause got louder. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" and others joined in. Elena was crying again, her hands clasped to her chest. Margaret walked off the stage on shaking legs. Once she was behind the curtain, she had to lean against the wall to steady herself. She had done it. She had actually done it. Performed in front of people who had paid to see her. People who came with expectations. And somehow, impossibly, she hadn't fallen apart. The stage manager approached her with wide eyes. "They're calling for an encore," he said. "I've never seen a reaction like this." "You have to go back out." Margaret went back out. This time she played Chopin, the nocturne she had started with all those weeks ago at the hotel. It felt right somehow. Full circle. From the beginning of this strange new chapter back to the piece that had started everything. When the concert finally ended, people lined up to meet her, to shake her hand, to tell her how much her playing had moved them. Margaret stood there in her simple black dress and tried to take it all in. A young woman around 20 years old waited until the end of the line. She had tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said to Margaret. "I'm studying music at the university, but my parents want me to quit and study something practical, something that makes money. Your story gave me hope. It reminded me why I started playing in the first place." Margaret hugged this stranger who reminded her so much of her younger self. "Don't give up," she whispered. "Whatever you do, don't give up." The months that followed were a blur. Margaret performed at bigger venues. She recorded her first album, a mix of classical pieces and her own compositions. The album sold surprisingly well, especially for classical music. It reached the top of the classical charts and even crossed over to mainstream success. She started teaching at the conservatory 3 days a week. Her students loved her because she understood struggle in a way their other teachers didn't. She knew what it meant to practice on broken pianos, to steal moments of beauty from a hard life, to keep playing even when no one was listening. Margaret never forgot where she came from. She went back to the Thornfield Hotel once, not to clean but to visit. Mr. Peterson gave her a tour like she was a dignitary. They had kept the old Steinway piano after all. Put a plaque on it that read, "Where Margaret Chen revealed her gift to the world." She ran her fingers over those yellowed keys one more time. They felt like old friends. "Thank you," she whispered to the piano, to the instrument that had kept her company through so many lonely nights. The young man who had challenged her to play that evening reached out through Elena. He wanted to apologize properly and to do something meaningful. He made a large donation to the foundation, specifically to help musicians from low-income backgrounds. He never tried to take credit for it publicly. It was just something he did to try to make right what he had done wrong. Margaret never became world famous in the way some musicians are. She wasn't selling out stadiums or topping pop charts, but in the world of classical music, she became something special. A symbol of second chances, of hidden talent waiting to be discovered, of the extraordinary things that can happen when someone finally gets the opportunity they deserve. She performed at Carnegie Hall eventually. That dream she had given up at 17 finally came true when she was 53. She walked out onto that legendary stage, looked out at the thousands of seats filled with people who came to hear her play, and felt her mother's presence somehow, felt her approval, her pride. "This is for you, Mom," Margaret whispered before she began, "for every sacrifice you made, for every dream you let me hold on to even when it seemed impossible." 3 years after that night at the hotel, Margaret sat in her apartment, the nice one with space and light and a beautiful piano by the window. She was preparing for another performance, running through scales to warm up her fingers. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of her students, a girl from a poor neighborhood who showed incredible promise. She had just won a regional competition and earned a scholarship to a summer music program. "I did it," the message read. "Just like you said I could. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." Margaret smiled and typed back a response. Then she turned back to the piano. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play. Not for a performance. Not for practice. Just for herself. Just for the pure joy of making music. Because after all these years, after everything that had happened, that was still her favorite thing. Playing piano in a quiet room, the notes filling the air, the music pouring out of her soul. She was 55 years old now. She had her own apartment, her own piano, a career she loved, and students who looked up to her. She had second chances and new beginnings. She had found her voice again after decades of silence. And every single day she was grateful. Grateful for Elena, who saw something in her. Grateful for that broken piano at the hotel. Grateful even for that young man whose cruelty accidentally opened a door. But most of all, grateful that she never completely stopped playing. That somewhere deep inside, through all those years of being invisible and overlooked, she kept the music alive. kept her fingers moving across imaginary keys, kept the dream breathing on life support until the moment it could finally wake up. Margaret played until the sun set outside her window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The music filled her small apartment and spilled out into the world. And somewhere out there, someone was listening, someone who needed to hear that it's never too late. That talent doesn't have an expiration date. That extraordinary things can happen to ordinary people. That a cleaning lady can become a concert pianist. That dreams deferred are not dreams dead. That your time can still come. Even when you've stopped believing it will. The music played on,